In our modern world, there are these hidden choke points, these invisible levers that control the flow of, well, everything. And right now, one of them is tightening its grip, a huge vulnerability most of us don't even see. And it forces us to ask a really, really important question. Seriously, what if our entire technological future, I'm talking about the green transition, the AI revolution, all of it, what if it all hung by a single invisible thread? A thread held by just one nation. Let's take a look at what's actually at stake here. Just look at this headline for a moment. From rare earth materials. This is the story behind today's video. The copper smelting and refining choke point you didn't quite spot. With that said, let's go straight to the intro. Okay, first up, the global shift to green energy. Every single wind turbine, every solar panel, every battery that powers an electric car, they all require an absolutely colossal amount of very specific, highly refined minerals. So without a steady, reliable supply of these materials, our ambitious plans to move away from fossil fuels, they don't just slow down, they could grind to a complete halt. Then you've got the AI revolution that's changing our world as we speak. We tend to think of AI as something that just exists in the cloud, right? But that cloud has a physical home. It lives in these massive data centers and server farms, all powered by advanced semiconductors. And all of them are built from these exact same critical materials. It's kind of the great irony, isn't it? Our digital world is built on a very fragile, very physical foundation. And maybe the most critical piece of the puzzle is global defense and national security. I mean, the next generation of military tech, we're talking F-35 fighter jets, hypersonic missile guidance systems, sophisticated battlefield communications. All of it is completely dependent on these strategic resources. So controlling the supply of these materials, well, it's not just an economic edge. It creates a deep and pretty dangerous vulnerability for any potential rival. So how in the world did we get here, to this critical point? For years, all the headlines have been about rare earth minerals. And yeah, for good reason, but that's only one part of the story. The real choke point, the place with the most immediate leverage, it's been hiding in plain sight this whole time. Look, we've all heard the warnings about rare earths. They are absolutely vital for high-tech magnets and electronics, no doubt about it. But our intense focus on them has maybe created a huge blind spot. The bigger, more immediate story might just be about a metal we've been using for thousands of years, copper. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. We all think of copper as common, right? The raw ore, the rock, is found all over the world, from Chile to Zambia. But that's not the choke point. See, the real power, the real control, isn't in digging rock out of the ground. It's in the incredibly complex, expensive, and often dirty process of refining it into the super high purity metal that all our modern tech demands. And this chart, wow, it just lays it all out. By 2025, China is on track to control a mind-boggling 57% of the entire world's refined copper output. Just let that sink in for a second. More than half of the single most important metal for electrification, for data centers, for the entire green economy, will be processed by one country. That's not just an industrial statistic, that is a massive geopolitical lever. A position like this doesn't happen by accident. This dominance in copper and other critical materials is the result of a very deliberate, very patient, decades-long industrial strategy. And to really get how it works, we have to look at the blueprint they perfected with rare earths. It all started right at the very top. Decades ago, Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping pointed to these resources not just as commodities to sell, but as fundamental strategic pillars for the nation's entire future. This quote, it wasn't just a casual remark. It was basically the starting pistol for a multi-generational plan to dominate the building blocks of the 21st century. And here's exactly how that plan unfolded, step by step. First, you secure the resource, like that gigantic Batu mine. Then you launch a strategic state-backed push to build out the whole industry. But here's the crucial step. You acquire the foreign tech and know-how, like when they bought the American firm Magnequench, which gave them the secrets to making advanced magnets. And finally, the endgame. You leverage that near monopoly with export controls, turning a resource into a political weapon. This is the exact playbook now being rolled out across the entire critical mineral spectrum. But this long-game strategy isn't just about geopolitics, it's also about economics. To really understand the motivation behind this relentless push for resource control, we have to look at the engine of China's economy, its colossal export machine. And right now, that engine is showing some serious signs of strain. The scale of this is just staggering. In 2023, China's trade surplus hit a record $1.2 trillion. To put that into perspective, no nation in history as a share of the global economy has ever had a surplus that big. Not even Japan at the height of its 1980s economic boom. It is a completely unprecedented level of global trade imbalance. So how did they pull this off? Well, it's a simple but pretty brutal formula. By slashing their export prices by nearly 20%, China managed to generate a 40% surge in the volume of goods they sold to the rest of the world. They're essentially flooding global markets with heavily subsidized products, everything from solar panels to electric cars. This strategy is so central to their economy that net exports accounted for almost a third of the country's GDP growth last year. That is a hugely bloated and frankly unsustainable share. But here's the crucial point that ties this all together. This aggressive export-at-all-cost strategy isn't just a sign of strength, it's a symptom of some deep-seated weaknesses in China's domestic economy. See, when your own population isn't buying enough stuff, you have to sell that massive excess production somewhere else. And the numbers really do paint a clear picture here. Youth unemployment is painfully high. Total debt has just ballooned to an unbelievable 340% of GDP. The property market, which used to be the main engine of growth, is stuck in a 4-year slump. And industrial profits are actually falling. All of this creates this massive industrial overcapacity that has to be exported just to keep factories running and people employed. And that puts immense pressure on industries all over the globe. So all of this brings us right back to our central theme. That control over refining, the midstream of the supply chain, is what turns all this domestic economic pressure into a powerful geopolitical weapon. It is the absolute linchpin of the entire strategy. Just look at this. It lays out the entire issue perfectly. Step 1, mining. That happens in a lot of different countries. Australia, Chile, the Congo, they're all digging ore out of the ground. But step 2, that complex chemical process of refining, that's where the choke point is. And because step 3, high-tech manufacturing, depends entirely on what comes out of that bottleneck, global industries become critically dependent on the one nation that controls it. And this is what we mean when we say geopolitical leverage. It's the ability to basically turn a valve, to slow down, to jack up the price of, or to even completely cut off the supply of these essential process materials to a competitor. You could threaten their most vital industries, from car manufacturing to national defense, almost overnight. And this isn't theoretical. The impact is already happening. According to the International Energy Agency, China is the top refiner for an incredible 19 out of 20 strategic minerals. That level of dominance creates such intense price pressure that competitors are literally being forced out of business. We've seen smelters in places like Namibia and the Philippines have to shut their doors. It just goes to show that having the raw ore in your ground doesn't give you independence if you still have to ship it to China to get it processed. So this all sets a pretty precarious stage for the next decade. The global economy is now hurtling toward a massive supply crunch, and a frantic, high-stakes race to secure the materials of the future is officially underway. And this chart, well, it's basically the deadline. The IEA is warning that just for copper alone, the world is heading for a potential 30% supply deficit by 2035. This isn't some minor imbalance you can fix with a few small adjustments. A gap this huge could trigger intense economic disruption, stalling the energy transition, and sending costs for everything from iPhones to new power grids absolutely skyrocketing. Now, nations in the West are waking up to this reality and are scrambling to build out alternative supply chains, but it is an immense uphill battle. Experts say new Western refining projects can cost 50% more than their Chinese counterparts, which benefit from state subsidies and cheaper labor. Plus, building new mines and refineries is a slow, difficult process that can easily take more than a decade to go from a proposal to actually producing something. And that's if it can even get past all the regulatory and environmental hurdles. So the physical building blocks of the 21st century for green energy, for artificial intelligence, for our entire technological future, they're now at the very center of a new geopolitical contest. And it really leaves us with one fundamental question: who is going to control the blueprint?